First of all, it's important to clarify the basic cognitive mechanism involved in melodic recognition activities. Let me get the whiteboard to explain this more clearly. In order to recognize notes by ear without helping ourselves with an instrument, we rely on a mental system which is made up of two main components: musical memory skills and note recognition skills. Here is how these two skills work together. Musical memory skills allow us to store the notes of a melody or only a chunk of it in our mind. Then, note recognition skills allow us to analyze the notes we've successfully stored in our memory and understand which notes they are, so we can give them a visual place on our instrument, or more generally, a name. After that, we can free up the space in our memory in order to retain the next group of notes and analyze them, and the cycle restarts again and again and again. Problems can occur in each of the two phases. So, for example, if you don't memorize a group of notes correctly, it's certain that even though you can recognize them perfectly, your answer won't be a precise representation of the original notes. The same happens if you store a group of notes correctly in your mind, but you can't recognize and interpret them correctly. Your answer will still be wrong. So I can say that improving either of these two skills will improve the overall performance of the system. As your musical memory gets more efficient, you'll be able to retain more notes at once, more clearly, and with a lower percentage of mistakes. So your note recognition skills will have a more solid ground where they can figure out the notes correctly. In a similar way, as your note recognition skills grow, you'll become faster and more accurate at processing notes and figuring them out. But if we take a closer look at this point, we can see that an indirect consequence of being faster at figuring out notes is being faster at freeing up memory space for the notes that are next to come. As a result, you'll need to retain less notes in your mind and for a smaller amount of time. So, as you can see, by improving note recognition skills, you'll weigh down less on your musical memory. This is one of the reasons why in this course we'll start by focusing only on improving note recognition skills, and we'll work on musical memory starting later on in the course. Another reason why we must do that is that musical memory relies and depends very much on the internalization of the tonal context, the key's colors, colors of the chords, triadic colors, and so on. Basically, perceiving the sensations that musical elements assume in the tonal context of the song is fundamental for us to store notes correctly in our memory. As Sloboda and Parker found in one of their studies, memorizing simple, well-formed tonal melodies involves building a mental model of the underlying structure in which not all of the surface detail is necessarily retained. With the term underlying structure, they are referring to the implied harmonic framework that's outlined by the melody. So I can make this quote easier to understand by changing these two words. And I'm pretty confident that at this point you know that any group of notes played in sequence implies a harmonic context, even though you might not be able to easily hear it. The last part of the quote means that recognizing the implied harmonic framework allows us to retain a big chunk of the melody, but we can still miss some details. For example, we can mix up one note with its neighboring notes in the key, we can distort the contour of the melody a little bit, and so on. But generally, if we have a good mental model of the implied harmonic framework, we won't make bigger mistakes, such as singing a note that's out of the implied key, which is far more evident and displeasing on a hearing level than the two mistakes I've talked about before. So, in other words, without proper internalization of these musical elements, which most of you will still need to develop at this point, notes, chords, etc. will still sound kinda blurry and unclear in your mind, and musical memory will be negatively affected by this. That's because without a strong mental model of the harmonic framework, your mind will tend to distort the pitches of the sounds when memorizing them. This is very similar to what happens with verbal language. Memorizing music without a proper internalization of the tonal framework at first is a little bit like trying to memorize a sentence in a language that you don't know. It would be much more difficult than memorizing a sentence of the same size in your native language, because knowing the meaning of the words helps us a lot in properly storing the sentence in our mind, whereas words without a meaning are just a bunch of random sounds and symbols. In music, meaning is not rational meaning, but a sensation, emotion, tension and rest, stability and instability, etc. And we can internalize these elements as we've internalized the word cat, and we now know what a cat is. So this is the second main reason why it's better to start by developing and refining our sensitivity to how notes, chords, etc. sound in the context of the key. Then, once these skills start to get to a reliable level, we will focus properly on improving our musical memory.